Welcome back to Minecraft and Creepy True Stories. Tonight's stories all take place deep in the woods, and every one of them is claimed to be true. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Story number 1. I can still remember almost every detail of what happened that night. A crazy encounter me and my friend had in the woods that still sends shivers down my spine. Back in May 2020, when everything was shut down, I was a senior at high school. I spent most days hanging out at my friend's place. They lived in a quiet little neighborhood in South Jersey. Really just 2 short streets that connected in a rectangle, surrounded by miles of woods. The only way out besides the main road was a narrow side trail leading to another small neighborhood off to the right. One night, around mid-May, we were just hanging out when I spotted a skateboard in their garage and decided I wanted to learn how to ride. We grabbed it and walked to the end of the street, right near the tree line, where there was a small hill perfect for practice. When we got there, only about a 2-minute walk, I noticed a path between 2 houses that led into the woods. I was curious, but we ignored it and I kept practicing until I hit the smallest pebble imaginable, wiped out, and fractured my wrist. The next day, I asked my friend if they'd ever been down that trail. They said, "Yeah, I go for walks there a couple times a week." That's when we decided it might be fun to explore it together. Easily one of the dumbest decisions we've ever made. We each brought a small flashlight, but didn't turn them on until we'd passed the last houses. The trail split at one point. The right path led toward that other neighborhood, but we decided to go deeper into the woods instead. Big mistake. After about 5 minutes of walking, we started hearing something, the sound of leaves crunching in front of us. We stopped, shined our lights, and saw nothing. Probably a deer, we told ourselves. We turned in a different direction, but about 5 minutes later, we heard it again, the same crunching, right in front of us. Still nothing. That's when it started to rain lightly. We both had this bad feeling. I whispered, "We need to get out of here." But we'd gone off the trail twice already, and when we finally found the main path again, we started hearing the same noises behind us. The rain was getting heavier, so we picked up the pace. I looked over my shoulder, and that's when I saw them, for flashlights, coming straight toward us. They were moving fast. We bolted. We ran as hard as we could, and in the panic, we sprinted right past the exit and deeper into the neighborhood. For a second, we thought about climbing a fence to cut through a yard, but with my fractured wrist, that wasn't happening. We turned back toward where the lights had been, but they were gone. Completely gone. We felt a tiny bit of relief and started walking fast toward the road. I made it out first, but my friend was still behind, walking slower. I told them to hurry up, and then I saw it again. 4 flashlights. Running. Coming straight toward my friend. I yelled him to run, and we both sprinted down the street, around the corner, not looking back until we hit the end. When I finally turned around, I saw 3 or 4 figures standing near the trail entrance, perfectly still, just watching. The street light behind them was dim, but enough to make out their shapes. We ran all the way back to the house, locked the doors, and didn't move for the rest of the night. To this day, I'll never go near that trail again. We still don't know who those people were, but we know they weren't cops, and they weren't just other hikers. They had to be down there before we even got there, waiting. Not a single word came from them, just the sound of their steps chasing us. I still believe, without a doubt, whoever they were didn't have good intentions if they'd caught up. Story number 2. To give some perspective, I live on about 467 acres in northeastern Alabama. Out here, we don't have many neighbors. Just my grandparents, who've owned this land since the early 80s. We live deep inside a hollow, surrounded by tall mountains on all sides. Recently, someone bought one of those mountains and turned it into an ATV park. Ever since then, the wildlife's been pushed down onto our property. Deer, coyotes, all kinds of things. It was November 1st when this happened. My siblings decided to go out riding the Polaris Ranger around the property. It was close to 10:30 at night when they started. There's a bridge over the creek, right near the start of the trail. That bridge is kind of like our welcome home marker. They rode loops around the property for about 15 or 20 minutes before something felt wrong. The oldest felt it first, a heavy, sinking dread, but didn't say anything. They kept riding, trying to shake it off. A few loops later, they spotted something on the ground. The middle one wanted to stop and look, but the oldest just said quietly, "Don't stop. We'll check in the morning." They drove on, but the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it got worse. Around 11:15, they stopped to read a text from our mom. The middle sibling looked out across a nearby field and froze. Standing across the field was something tall, around 6 feet, maybe more. It had 4 legs, but it wasn't standing like an animal. It looked like it was trying to stand up straight. He swears it looked right at him. And the second it did, he floored it. No one said a word, but everyone felt it. The same panic, the same weight in the air, like they were being hunted. By the time they reached the bridge again, the youngest started crying and begging to go home. There's a metal gate you have to open and close to get back onto our property. When the oldest got out to unlatch it, she said she felt it. This overwhelming sense that if she looked up, she wouldn't survive what she saw. She didn't look. She just threw the gate open, jumped back in, and they sped home. They made it back fine, but something about them wasn't right. Our porch dog, who always follows them on rides, hadn't gone with them that night. Wouldn't even leave the porch. The cattle were nowhere to be seen. The fields were completely silent. They said the only sounds were the wind, the engine, and the faint smell of smoke drifting through the hollow. They'd been listening to music earlier. When all this started, the song, Pumped Up Kicks, came on. The one with the whistling. That's when they all felt it most strongly, like they weren't just being watched, but hunted. When they finally got home, their pupils were blown wide, almost black, like their eyes couldn't adjust to the light. We've gone back since then. Everything looks normal. Nothing out of place. But none of them ever forgot how it felt. I still don't know what they saw out there that night. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Story number 3. My grandmother passed away in 2018 at the age of 96. She used to tell a story that had been passed down through our family about something or someone they called Nancy. This was back when she was a little girl, living in a small town called Kilmacle, Mississippi. Her family was poor and lived on the outskirts of town, surrounded by thick woods. Several relatives lived nearby in small houses scattered around the same patch of land. Everyone knew about Nancy. They said he was a large man who lived in the woods and had 6 toes on 1 foot. No one ever saw him clearly, just quick glimpses of a tall figure wearing women's clothes. He was known for stealing only women's clothing from clotheslines, especially bonnets. That's where the name Nancy came from. Sometimes they'd find his footprints near the houses, 1 foot with 6 toes, pressed deep into the dirt. My grandmother said that anyone could go out into the yard at night and call out, "Nancy, throw me a rock," and a rock would come flying out of the woods and hit the side of the house. The woods were far enough away that no ordinary person could throw a rock that far, and the rocks were big, too big for a normal throw. One story in particular stuck with her. Her mother, my great-grandmother, was home alone one afternoon, washing dishes while the men were out working in the fields. My grandmother, just a toddler at the time, was playing on the floor nearby. Then, she heard the back door creak open. She knew right away who it was. She didn't turn around, didn't move. She just kept washing dishes, pretending not to notice. She picked my grandmother up and set her on the counter beside the sink, keeping her close. Whoever was behind her walked into the kitchen. Heavy, slow footsteps on the wooden floor. The person opened the icebox, took some food out, and walked back out the door. When my great-grandmother finally turned around, she saw the muddy footprints he'd left behind. 1 foot had 6 toes. Another relative had a story too. She was home one night watching a few children while ironing. The kids were playing in the bedroom when she noticed something in the window, a dark face, staring in through the screen. The house was built up on blocks, so whoever it was had to be tall. She blew out the lamp, pulled the kids to the floor, and told them to stay quiet. For a long time, they just lay there in the dark, listening. Then she heard it, breathing. Slow, deep, and right outside the window screen. It was so loud she convinced herself it must have been a horse. She never looked. They all stayed on the floor until morning. When daylight came, she went outside. Sure enough, there were fresh footprints beneath the window. 1 with 6 toes. Nancy was mostly harmless. He only ever stole clothes and food, until one night, he attacked one of my grandmother's cousins named Grover. For some reason, Nancy seemed drawn to Grover. He could get Nancy to throw rocks from the woods no matter whose house he was visiting. But one night, as Grover was walking home, something came out of the dark and tore into him. He said it was huge, strong enough to shred his clothes and leave deep scratches all over his body. He never saw its face, just the shape of a large figure wearing a bonnet. After that, the men in the family went out hunting for Nancy. They searched for days through the woods and into the hills, but they never found him. What they did find was strange. A small cave filled with branches hung with lizards and small animals tied to sticks, like some kind of ritual decoration. Not long after that, my grandmother's family moved away from Kilmacle. They never heard from Nancy again. Years later, I tried to research it myself. I even contacted a local historian who told me that around that time, early 1900s, native people in that area were being forced out, and some had stayed behind in the woods. Maybe that explains it. Maybe it doesn't. All I know is my grandmother wasn't the type to make things up. And when she told that story, she always looked just a little too serious. Like she still remembered the sound of that rock hitting the side of the house. Story number 4. I wanted to repost a story that was told to me long ago by a friend. I have many other stories that I've been told, and some that I've personally experienced myself that truly shocked me to the core or left me perplexed. This story comes from the perspective of an old co-worker named Cujo, a member of the Navajo Nation. When I was working in construction in northern New Mexico on a reservation, he told me about a very strange encounter he had near his home, somewhere between New Mexico and Arizona. It began one night after Cujo had finished a grueling 12-hour shift. When he got home, he and his wife got into a heated argument. Frustrated, he left the house with a pack of beer and started driving around the reservation roads near his home. After a few minutes of driving through the dark desert, he found a narrow road that wound up toward a mountain or basin. He said the path was so steep and tight that he was surprised he made it to the top without rolling off, and he knew getting back down would be even harder. At the top, Cujo sat on the tailgate of his truck, drinking and trying to calm down. After some time, he began hearing strange noises in the distance. Sounds unlike anything he had ever heard. He was familiar with coyotes, wild dogs, and other desert animals, but this was different. After his second or third beer, he heard the sounds again, closer this time. He said it sent a chill down his spine. Uneasy, he decided to get back into his truck, drink the rest inside, and listen to some music. A few minutes later, the noises returned, now louder, almost like screams. Terrified, he started his truck and sped off down a random dirt road. Not knowing exactly where he was, he took another path leading away from the mountain. But the screams followed. Then, out of nowhere, he was forced to a stop. Standing in the road was an elderly Navajo man holding a weapon. The man ordered Cujo to stop and come inside his house. Cujo told me, "What would you do in that situation? Keep driving into the dark with those noises following you, or listen to the man with the firearm telling you to come inside?" He chose to go inside. To his surprise, inside the small home was an elderly woman and 3 young children, none older than 12, all holding weapons. The man asked Cujo if he'd heard the noises, and Cujo confirmed he had. The stranger warned him that he wouldn't be safe alone and insisted he stay the night. Cujo said he had never met these people before and had no idea anyone even lived in that area. That night, no one in the house slept. The strange noises continued, following with screams, footsteps, and something circling the small home until dawn. When the first light of morning appeared, Cujo thanked the family and left. He said they were kind people and that he was grateful for their help that night, because he truly didn't know what might have happened otherwise. After that experience, he never went out alone on the reservation, at night especially unarmed. He had heard stories of Bigfoot and skinwalkers before, but he never believed them until that night. I was just 18 when he told me this story. I'm 30 now. I worked with Cujo for 3 years before joining the military, and I haven't seen or spoken to him since. But I believe his story and others I've heard from people who live on the reservation. Story number 5. I'm not really sure where else to share this, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about what happened to me while camping at Jamaica State Park in Vermont last August. It was me, my boyfriend, and 2 friends. We were doing a little Vermont camping road trip for the weekend. The first night we stopped at Jamaica State Park, a place I actually used to visit a lot as a kid. While we were setting up camp and later sitting around the fire, we all noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no cicadas, just silence. It was strange, but we brushed it off. When I was trying to fall asleep, that silence started to feel unsettling. It was so still that every tiny movement felt loud. I eventually drifted off, but sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to this banging sound. It wasn't close at first. It came from the campground loop road, right beside our tent. It didn't sound like footsteps or anyone walking. It was just this deep, metallic clang, steady and rhythmic, like someone hitting a metal pan every few seconds, over and over again. It circled the campground twice. 20 minutes of that same sound, perfectly spaced, moving slowly around the loop. I've camped alone, I've run into bears, I've slept deep in the woods before, but this was different. I couldn't move. I just lay there frozen, running through every explanation I could think of, and none of it made sense. Eventually, the sound faded, and I somehow fell back asleep. The next morning, I asked everyone if they'd heard it. Only one of my friends said yes, and he described it exactly the same way I did. We tried laughing it off, saying maybe it was a moose or something. But when I asked the park ranger if moose were common around there, she laughed and said it would be very rare. I told her what we heard, and she said she'd listen that night to see if it happened again. That second night, we went to sleep half expecting it, but nothing happened. No sounds, no movement, just that same heavy silence. We packed up and left the next morning, still joking about it, but none of us ever came up with a real explanation. Story number 6. My girlfriend at the time and I went camping 5 hours away from home for her birthday. We made the trip the day after a big storm passed through. We left town early and got there in the early afternoon. The guy at the entrance to the campground said there were no other visitors in the area that weekend. We were like, oh, this is gonna be sick. First, we drove down these long pathways to our designated area. As you got closer to it, the road narrowed. So basically, you had to back out to get out. We unloaded the car, got the tent set up, and decided to go walk around the woods. It was dead silent, but it was still bright out, so we just took in all the nature we could and walked a few miles away. We reached this point in the woods where there were some weird-looking cabins. They were very uniform, all built the exact same way. Like, I guess they were a part of the camping grounds, but they seemed way out of the way, and there was no sign of life. It felt eerie to be at, like we shouldn't be there. So we turned around and walked back. We took a breather in the tent, then tried to start a fire in the fire pit. Neither of us had ever been camping before, and had no idea how to start a fire. We had bought some of those self-lighting logs from Walmart and some lighter fluid, but everything else around us was soaked to the bone from the rain that had passed through the day before. Eventually, we got a small fire going and ate hot dogs and marshmallows and spent some time looking at the stars. Then we noticed just how dark it was out there. My girlfriend was easily spooked and was like, "Can we get into the tent now?" So we put the fire out and crawled into the tent. We were talking to each other, but I could tell she was tense. Suddenly, she put her hand over my mouth and was like, "Do you hear that?" Before I could respond, we heard footsteps. Like, heavy footsteps. It sounded like a group of people walking. I whispered to her, "It's probably just animals or something." Then we heard mumbling, like low mumbling. We couldn't make out words, but it didn't sound like a sound an animal could make. It sounded like words but hushed and unelaborated. We sat in silence, staring at each other in the dark for what felt like forever. The mumbling got louder, as did the footsteps, until it sounded like it was right outside of our tent. We both froze. I don't think either of us were breathing. And then, silence. We waited and waited and waited. I'm still not sure how much time passed. Eventually, my girlfriend said, "We have to get to your car." The adrenaline was pumping, so I peeked out of the tent into the darkness and told her to stay behind me. Then we ran to the car. I locked the doors. I kept looking around for any signs of life, but we were seemingly alone. I looked at her and was like, "Okay, I'm gonna grab our stuff, you stay in the car." I hopped out and ran. As I turned around to go get the tent, I started hearing footsteps closing in again. In a moment of pure terror, I yanked the tent out of the ground, wrapped the tarp around it, and slung it over my shoulder and shoved it into the trunk. I didn't say anything when I got in the car except, "Do we have everything in here?" My girlfriend said yes, and I floored it in reverse out of our camping area. Then we came to a fork in the road that went in like 6 different directions. I asked my girlfriend if she remembered which path we came down to get in here, and she told me she didn't know. We chose a random one and ended up in a different camping spot. I cursed under my breath and slammed it into reverse again. Then I noticed from the angle we had exited from, I could see the main path back to the gate, thanks to a small sign behind an overgrown bush. As we hightailed it out of there, I noticed there was a single small green light out in the woods to our right, near where our designated spot was. We drove the entire 5 hours back to our hometown and fell asleep on my girlfriend's parents' couch at around 4 a.m. We never talked about the trip ever again, and I haven't had any desire to camp since. Story number 7. In 2016, my boyfriend and I went camping in eastern Pennsylvania. The place we decided to stop for the night was primitive. Camping was free, no cell service, barely a road, etc. We did encounter two other people. They might not factor into what happened later at all, but they were creepy, so I'll describe them. The first was a woman who had her truck off to the side of the road a little as we drove past. She had the hood open and seemed to be waiting for someone to stop and offer to help. Usually my boyfriend had no problem helping someone, but he said his time something about her put him off. She didn't really seem like she needed help, and usually people who need help look at you hopefully as you approach. She looked like she just expected we would stop. The next person came when we had chosen a spot and were setting up a fire for hot dogs. I had noticed people drive by a few times, but my boyfriend pointed out each time was the same car, and the man in the car watched us each time he passed. My boyfriend was a little uneasy about this, but we had driven around for a while before finding a place we liked. It had been raining and everything was muddy, and we wanted the driest site possible. He could have been doing the same thing. We briefly thought about moving, but the road was muddy too. If he wanted to find us, all he had to do was follow the tracks. There were some other tracks, but not many. He'd only have to backtrack a little to locate us again. He didn't come by another time, so we stayed and spent the several remaining hours before dark goofing off. No one else drove by. Whether or not those two had anything else to do with our experience, the real fear came later. We had gone to sleep in our tent, and sometime around 3 a.m. we were awoken by this very loud noise. I can't describe it very well, or even remember exactly what it sounded like, but my boyfriend said it reminded him of a chain gun revving up. It was also similar to how it would sound if someone recorded a shovel being dragged over gravel and played it over a loudspeaker, is another way he described it. He jumped up and looked out the little window but couldn't really see anything. The sound repeated itself another few times. I was too scared to speak, so my boyfriend whispered that it was probably miles off and I should go back to sleep. I didn't question this, as I figured loud sounds could be easily heard miles off. After we left, he told me it sounded like it had actually been coming from just down the road, but he didn't want to freak me out. Looking back, I probably should have wondered why he would bother to whisper if apparently the sound was far off. I was still terrified. Every little thing I heard outside sounded like someone was walking around the tent. We laid there for a while longer when finally my boyfriend told me to get dressed because we were leaving. I got alarmed by this, and even more alarmed when he unwrapped the machete we had bought just for this trip from its plastic before opening the tent. We quickly packed up and loaded the car. I looked around for footprints that weren't our own, but despite the moon providing plenty of light, I couldn't really see. I did point out something my boyfriend hadn't noticed though before we got into the car. There was a beer can buy our dead fire that hasn't been there before. We didn't even bring beer. While we were driving away, my boyfriend explained that he was nervous someone might have been trying to lure us out, so he didn't think it was a good idea to run from the tent right away. He also half expected to find out gas tank had been siphoned out, but that wouldn't have stopped us because we had a hybrid car. We joked that that would make a funny hybrid commercial. The rest of our trip, we only stayed in well-populated campsites or got a hotel. Story number 8. I used to be in a group that's somewhat like the Scouts, so we spent a lot of time in the woods, and some weird things happened often, but most of the time it was easy to explain. One thing happened though that, to this day, scares me. I was a leader for the age group of 8 to 10-year-olds, and we were out on a camping trip. It was the first year we stayed on that terrain, and it was huge. Normally we tend to explore the majority of a terrain before the kids arrive, so we were aware of any possible dangerous spots to avoid. This time it was impossible. Every camp we have what we call a night game. It's usually a scary game in which the kids have to complete several tasks while the leaders scare them. Obviously we had 1-2 during that camp. We masked up as monsters and hid out in the woods close to the checkpoints they had to pass. While running in between checkpoints, I found an open stretch of forest with little to no foliage, so it was ideal for chasing after them. There was no real room to hide besides behind trees, so I couldn't use my flashlight, or they'd be able to see me from miles away. It was dark, like the unsettling kind of dark that plays tricks on your eyes, and you start imagining things that aren't real. During my stay there, I saw a shadow that was around my size running past me a few times. I couldn't see it very well, so I just assumed I was imagining things because nothing was there when I turned my flashlight on. The game was nearing its end, and I saw the shadow again. This time I could see it vaguely standing near a tree not too far away from me. I thought it was one of the other leaders hiding to scare kids, and decided to go over there as it was about time to go back. I aimed my flashlight towards the tree, and while getting closer I noticed that there was indeed someone standing there dressed in what looked like a torn burlap sack and had their head covered with a few white plastic bags that looked like they were tied together. I started to feel pure dread. Something felt really off. I asked if everything was okay, but they didn't respond. The only thing I heard was this weird sound that sounded like someone knocking on wood. Nevertheless, I went a bit closer until I was about 10 meters away from this person. The knocking sound turned out to be that person smacking his head repeatedly into the tree, and I noticed he looked like a male. He was barefoot and his arms and legs were covered with crusted mud. His hands were in a weird, cramped position. I was convinced this was just one of the other leaders pulling a prank, so I told them to knock it off. He slowly turned his head and started walking towards me. Something inside me just told me to run. It didn't matter if it was just a stupid prank, and I ran away scared for nothing. If this wasn't a prank, it felt like I was in serious danger, so I ran as fast as I could. I heard him running after me, but I didn't want to turn around to look as I'd probably run into a tree. I arrived back at the campsite, and every single person that could be dressed like that was already there. They couldn't have gotten there before me, and if they did, they didn't have the time to change into their regular clothes. Still, I told them, and that they gave me a good scare with that. They just looked weird at me, thinking I was trying to scare them, and we left it at that. Next day I wanted to go check it out. Who knows, maybe some weirdo ate the wrong mushroom and might be out there dying from hypothermia. I took someone else with me just in case, and there was nothing but endless trees. We arrived at the tree where I saw the person banging his head, and there was a dead, skinned rabbit nailed to the tree. We called the cops. They looked around quickly and brushed it off as just a prank from another scouting group or some kids from the nearby town, and left it at that. We didn't notice anything weird after that, so it probably was a dumb prank. But seriously, some people have a weird sense of humor. Story number 9. I have a friend who works as a trail ranger, basically someone who removes illegal hunting equipment and checks remote areas, but doesn't deal with law enforcement. One day he was out collecting illegal wildlife cameras and taking down hunting stands, feeders, and blinds with another ranger. Partway through the job, the other ranger said he wasn't feeling well and headed back to the station on an ATV. It was about an hour ride from where they were. My friend finished the last camera when he suddenly heard voices somewhere in the woods. He was extremely far from any marked trail, so hearing people out there was strange. He called out, but nobody responded. As it was getting dark, he decided to head back. But when he tried to start his ATV, nothing happened. He checked it and realized the battery cable had been unplugged. He reconnected it and started driving, but the ATV was barely moving. Less than half a mile later, it completely died. He radioed the station saying he needed someone to pick him up. They told him they'd send help, but it would be at least an hour. He asked if the other ranger had made it back yet. They said no. He built a small fire to wait, and before long, he heard the voices again. This time it sounded like two people arguing, one angry and one scared. He called out asking if anyone needed help, but the argument continued like he wasn't even there. He estimated they were maybe 1,000 feet away. He radioed again, and they told him they were still trying to figure out which trail he was on because the other ranger had taken the tablet with the map when he left and still hadn't returned. A few minutes later, the voices started up again. My friend decided to walk toward them, thinking maybe they were lost hikers or hunters who could at least help him navigate out. But the closer he walked, the further away the voices seemed to move, like he was chasing an echo. After about 20 minutes, he gave up and returned to his fire. Then he got another call on the radio. They told him they had located the other ranger. He had collapsed, was covered in vomit, and was being taken to the hospital. They had circled the areas he marked off, so they now knew roughly where my friend was. Then the radio fell silent completely, and the voices came back. With nothing else to do, he just listened. He heard things like, "It wasn't yours to take," and "You knew better." He assumed it was two hunters arguing over an animal. Then one of the voices yelled something he couldn't understand, followed by complete silence. Then a single loud gunshot. My friend immediately put out his fire and hid. He didn't move or speak for what felt like forever until he finally saw ATV lights coming through the trees. When he got back, he told the ranger, who picked him up everything. They called for more people and searched the woods for hours, but found nothing that night. The next morning they returned with police and tracking dogs. After about an hour, they found a shallow grave containing the remains of a man who had clearly been shot in the head. But it wasn't recent. The body had been there for years. So either two real people coincidentally argued and fired a gun at the exact location of a long-buried murder scene, or my friend somehow heard an argument and gunshot from a crime that happened years earlier. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. Thanks for watching.